Bits are flowing. Waiting for the preview on YouTube to pop up. Alright, looks like we're live. Let me just get an audio check. Welcome to the stream. Like we're live. Let me just get an audio check. Alright. So yeah, the mic sounded better on the last stream. So the end of the stream, the audio cut out. So here's while I was drawing this diagram. So I came back to just walk through it once again and then expand a little bit on the APIs of Twitter and Mastodon queries. So we've got this app called Hogumathi. It's on Glitch, and it's a Twitter app for the API and archive. And then yesterday I added Mastodon, and today I expanded on that a little bit. So it started off with just one Python file, broke it off into API when I brought in the archive, broke off OAuth. Archive has been running with SQLite, importing from the Twitter zip file. And then I copied the Twitter API onto Mastodon. OAuth is pretty similar but not the same. And then there's one Twitter server and N Mastodon servers. So here's the user interface. So we've got Twitter and Mastodon. Alright, so yeah, these all share the same views and set of actions where supported. What I really wanted to get into was the timelines, and there's something that scales a little bit better on Twitter's side, and let's just look at what it is and why. So the Mastodon query API it's okay. I mean, at first glance, alright, cool, we've got status ID created at visibility. Nothing weird going on there. So what we're not seeing is when we look at a timeline from a bunch of different users, and especially when we look at a person's profile. So we've got status ID, you can see in the status bar. We've got created at, and then we've got the handle of a user. So that's just glossed over here. So I don't think there's a mention of how it's attached here. So you notice we don't see any username or anything here right now, right? So maybe we'll get a better example if we look at the account statuses. No, I guess that's probably a user timeline. I forget how we actually get a list of statuses for users. Let me look at the code real quick. So it is under accounts statuses. I missed it. I was looking for it here. I guess maybe I just tap there. Yeah, get in account statuses. So we still don't see any username, right? Okay, there's username, display name. So what is this for? This is for getting accounts followers. So there's different types of objects in Mastodon. There's account object, and it's got a bunch of fields on it. There's username, display name, avatar, note, etc. So this user doesn't have a display name set. So there's a display name, there's a username. And I currently don't do anything for profile, so I don't show their bio and all that. But if we go to the handy dandy data set, so I've got one function that transforms it to a simpler view UI, but just for debugging purposes. So we've got, display name. This is not Mastodon specific at all. I'm trying to make it so that we can see the camera as well. Now I can't see over the microphone. You guys can't see that. But yeah, so I've got this function. Where I take a post data, so that would be a status, and I just convert it to a simpler model. And this is shared with the other Twitter implementation, the API, and the archive. And then I just put the raw activity there. So we can get to that through the web interface. So now, here's the raw activity. So it has account, card, content created at, so this is an account object. We've also got a status object. So that actually has an account on it. So it's got created at, content, ID, tags, URL, card, etc., as we see over here. So a lot of this is okay. So in reply to ID, there's no embedded reply, which is okay. It just means that if we see that, we need to go ahead and fetch the reply. And since we have an ID, we can get a status by ID. So status is view a single status, and we can get it by ID there. And it returns one of these status objects. So actually one thing I don't know is if there's a way to get multiple statuses at once, which on Twitter you can get up to 100 tweets at once. So you can get parent and child statuses in context, but I don't see a way to get multiple statuses by ID. So you're going to have to do a lot more requests to populate a chatty timeline with a bunch of replies. So we don't see that too much on Mastodon, at least as I've used it. I'm using pretty quiet instance. But you know, on Twitter you can get huge conversations going on. Like there's probably a bunch just on the timeline right now. I mean, yeah, right there, there's 21 replies. Or no, sorry, 4 replies. My bad. So 106 replies. View full conversation. So there's a bunch of replies. There's probably replies to replies. So not as much as I would have thought. But yeah. So for Mastodon, how do we get this status and all of the replies to it? So we probably use that get a parent and child posts with context. Get statuses above and below the status in a thread. So in Twitter this would be the conversation ID. And there's no concept of that in Mastodon. There's just in reply to ID. So now Twitter, on the other hand, you can give it a query. You can give it a list of expansions. And fields and media fields, place fields. So each of the expansions of this type will have these fields available on it. Tweet fields, author ID. So that would expand the user for the poster of a tweet, but by default it only has tweet fields. Oh my gosh, look how much you're scrolling, it's so annoying, right? So tweet fields, author ID, there's text somewhere. So all of these are optional. You can get as little as you need for display. So you can say, oh, this is still crap compared to GraphQL or something. It's, yeah, similar to GraphQL, but just using plain HTTP. So then your expansions reference tweets.id. So if you got a quote or a reply, that's how that shows up as a reference tweet. So if we go up to expansions, so author ID, so that'll expand the user object, and this will be much more clear when we look at the code. As well, there is documentation at the bottom about what all the different fields are. So entities mentions username, author ID, in reply to user ID, reference tweets.id. So these are expansions. So then, yeah, in addition to tweet.fields, there's user.fields. So what fields do we want for a user? We can get, their name, their location, their description, that's in their profile, they're created at, their verified status, the URL that they share, public metrics, so like how many followers they have. So all this stuff is optional. So you can see, it's if you're not a programmer, it might be harder to imagine what's happening behind the scenes. Like, why not just include everything when you're talking about 400 million users? I did an experiment in C on the Raspberry Pi here. It's kind of delicate with the power cable to move and it's recording right now. But yeah, box this size has 8 gigs of RAM. This is the 1 gig version. But I did the math and figured out that if I pack the memory, I can put 400 million, or was it 200 million, last active timestamps and user IDs in memory. And, I did some techniques to save memory, but I was able to do it in an afternoon at a coffee shop, which, by the way, perfect interlude. I can't code in this space. I can only talk. Just for political reasons. So if you want me to go out and develop more, I'm only budgeted for Saturday and Sunday to do this stuff, and potentially Thursday and Friday I can go to the library at 9, but I prefer to start my day at like 5:30, be butt in chair 5:30 when the coffee shop opens, like 6 at the latest. I don't usually like to be like the first one to walk in right when it opens, but yeah, 9 o'clock is getting late. Noon, I'm already on the decline by noon. I'm in bed by 8 o'clock usually, maybe 9. And I do intermittent fasting, so my first meal is at like 2 to 3 p.m. So by that time I'm getting pretty hungry, and so if I get to the library at noon, I don't have very much work time. So got to start earlier in the morning. But interlude over. So the Twitter API, it's obviously more mature. It's been around for a lot longer, whereas the Mastodon API is practical. It's sort of like I'm slapping my code together to get it to work. Mastodon is in some ways slapped together so it'll work. And so, it's not that big of a deal on a timeline view where you've got a whole bunch of different users. You've got the status this user, the status this user, the status this user. So there's not much repetition yet. So there, it's nice, clean, practical. So now, for this one, you're going to have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 copies of the same data. So I'm going to guess that's probably, so Ray News. So on that activity, each post is going to have a copy of the same data, which, compression, not a big deal. True. But it's a scalability thing. Like, if it's a couple hundred users, it's not a big deal. If it's a couple million users, it starts to be a big deal. So, everything's trade-offs. I'm not saying one is terrible. I'm just showing what the differences are. So now on the code side of Twitter, I've got, say for example this timeline. Each post, it's 20 tweets, but it actually only returns the user object once. How does it do that? So let's look at the code quick, because that's the most clear. The API doc is good. It does describe, oops, I didn't mean to click that, changing windows. So it does describe what the fields are. So response fields, tweet by default, so ID, text, created at you have to request, author ID you have to request, edit history. It's interesting, it's an array. Actually, edit, that's another difference too that we can get into in a sec, is how edits are implemented on Mastodon versus Twitter. So conversation ID, now that's something that doesn't exist on Mastodon. We've just got in reply to. So if you've got one status that's a reply to a reply, how do you get the parent ID? Well, easy, you use that get statuses in context function. So, right. I haven't looked and seen how that's implemented, and you know, what kinds of caching it does, what kinds of fetches it does, stuff like that. But Twitter just does it by having a conversation ID, and every reply to a reply is within that same conversation ID, even though it also has reply to tweet ID. So then we've got these entity expansion fields. We've got public metrics fields, non-public metrics, organic, promoted, which are non-public. We've got include tweets. So that is if you have a tweet deep down in the thread, you'll get the conversation tweet included and what it's in reply to included. If you include the author ID, the in reply to author ID as expansions, you'll get these include.users. If you request the attached images and things like that, that's another thing we didn't mention on Mastodon. I think there's just a media field on there. Yeah, media attachments. So they're just included. There's no way to request it or not. So it's an optional thing on Twitter. And then each request has a pagination token, oldest ID, newest ID, count, and errors. So now it does make the client logic a little bit more complicated because you have to assemble this stuff yourself. So in Mastodon, it's just all there. Just post data, it's got a count on it, and you just populate this object based on that. On Twitter, you get this thing called includes, and so if you want the user of the tweet, you have to go tweet data author ID, iterate through the list of includes.users, and get that user by ID. So here I'm not doing a check to make sure it's there, because I've requested it. You know, if it's not there, we've probably got bigger problems. And similar for if it's a retweet of something, we've got to go through the list of reference tweets. So these are just tweet IDs still. So retweet of, and then it's just the ID for reference tweets. And then there's more logic down below that's similar to this to fetch the actual tweets. So yeah, I could clean this up a little bit. not arguing that. It's just figuring out how stuff works. So populate it, and then we've got, if it's a retweet of, then the same thing. We go through the list of includes.get tweets, match the included ID with the retweet of ID. We update the original tweet to have some extra info, and then that comes out as whoever it is retweeted. So similar for media attachments, we've got media keys, and then we've got includes media, and we then map those out. So it's a little bit more complicated, but it's also more compact. So you get to selectively request things more like GraphQL. So it's good in terms of like bandwidth savings. It's good on the server side in terms of, if maybe you've got a local cache of users already, and you've got some special sauce when you fetch the users to get it into the cache, fetch it once, lock it, blah, blah, blah. So you never actually request the user expansion, for example. So a lot of the Twitter APIs have quotas as well, and I'm not completely sure how expansions are counted against quotas. Like you can fetch 500,000 tweets per month, so I'm pretty sure that expansion tweets are counted against that. I'm not sure if there's a monthly user fetching limit. There's definitely a 15-minute level quota. So you can retrieve multiple users with IDs. That's nice. So if you've got a whole thread, you can fetch all the users at once. That's something that Mastodon doesn't have. So the rate limit is 900 per 15-minute request. So I don't know if the expansions are counted against that in terms of users. I would guess not, but they could be. I haven't done any testing on that. And let's see, what was that thing that we said we could come back to? I'll have to rewatch. It's pretty late here, and the coffee is long worn off, so we're going on a half an hour. So yeah, I thought I'd use the whiteboard a little bit more, but that's okay. It's bothering me. I've been getting better about watching these videos, so the point that I said I'd expand on, I'll probably do that in a future video. Definitely, if you want to see this work continue more than 2 days a week, hit me up. I need $25 a week for coffee, $5 a day. That'll rent me 3 to 6 hours in a space. Otherwise, I've got to stay here and do personal admin work. It looks like a good spot to code, but just politically I can't code here. The dust also kind of kills me, but it's not something that I can't work around. So this channel, it's always changing over time. It's like a 5-year-old channel. I've been doing streams about apps that I've been making, and I've been doing streams about domestic abuse, narcissistic abuse, biblical slavery, this kind of stuff over the course of months. So I've got a pretty cool one that is like the physics of narcissistic abuse. So we'll get into the vibration scale, and we'll talk about something called exclusion zone water, easy water, basically how the physics of water within a cell is charged and how infrared light can cause water to move through tubule structures and create that same sort of exclusion zone on the edge of the charged area, pushing contaminants away from the walls of that charged area and into the center. So you could like make a water filtration system on that. My Instagram photo on an account of same name, that account has a photo posted of that process. So it's pretty interesting as far as like, you know, get your sunlight. And then there's a video that mentions if you have two physically sealed bottles of water, one with a DNA sample in it and one without, put it next to each other, and then put the one without the DNA sample into the raw materials for DNA, it actually assembles a matching DNA strand, you know, talking like 30 base pairs as opposed to like the whole DNA. But that is extremely interesting. So that means, you know, two vessels of water that are sealed, you know, including air, can create a copy of the DNA. So that just means that if you're in proximity to things, the vibrations affect each other. So what is narcissistic abuse? Like, a narcissist is someone who's stuck in shame. And, you know, we talk about like spiritual warfare. I don't want to get too deep into it because this is a stream on Mastodon and Twitter. But yeah, you can imagine, you know, the way that narcissists and empaths, which are a spectrum as opposed to, you know, two discrete types, interact with each other. And it's like the higher vibration a person is, the more they bother the low vibration person. And probably vice versa. But a high vibration person has better emotional intelligence and maturity and whatnot. So the bothersome feelings, you know, they're more nuanced. They're not just like, you make me feel bad, so you're bad, you know. So anyway, I think a lot of engineers are probably pretty empathic at their core. Does their maturity develop? You know, it depends what kinds of stressors life gives them, but we'll do a whole stream on that. I know I've already talked about that for like 2 or 3 minutes, and we're just trying to look at Twitter and Mastodon APIs. So yeah, just wanted to get this off my chest. So thanks for joining, and looking forward to seeing you soon.